Writing variant equals document ID equals for 8317, title equals part 1, cuff him, Victoria Sterling said with a smile. And that was the moment everyone in the marble lobby decided Ethan Walker must be guilty. The words carried cleanly through the 40-story headquarters of Sterling Dynamics, past the security desk, past the glass elevators, past nearly 60 employees who had stopped pretending not to watch. Ethan stood beside the reception counter in a faded blue work shirt, his hands open at his sides as two police officers approached. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked across the lobby at Victoria, the woman whose name was carved into the steel wall behind her. "Mr. Walker," one officer said, "place your hands behind your back, please." "I understand. You have nothing to say?" Victoria asked. Ethan slowly turned toward her. "Not yet." The handcuffs clicked shut. Somewhere near the elevators, someone whispered that Ethan had been caught stealing confidential files. Another employee lifted a phone before security quietly told him to put it away. Victoria folded her arms, immaculate in a charcoal business suit, watching the struggling single father as though his humiliation were merely another problem she had successfully removed from her company. "You should have known your place," she said. A few nervous laughs followed. Ethan looked at her for several seconds, calm enough to make the laughter die by itself. "I did," he replied. "Did you?" Victoria's smile tightened. 3 days earlier, most people at Sterling Dynamics had barely known Ethan's name. He was 41, widowed, and raising his 9-year-old daughter Lily in a modest 2-bedroom apartment outside Columbus, Ohio. He packed her lunch before sunrise, worked contract maintenance wherever the hours were available, and measured wealth differently from the people occupying the executive floors. To Ethan, wealth was having enough gas to make it through Friday, enough groceries for Lily's favorite Saturday pancakes, and enough time at night to hear about whatever happened in 4th grade. He had learned that dignity was often quiet. It did not need expensive shoes or a corner office. It simply needed someone unwilling to surrender it. Victoria Sterling understood power differently. At 38, she had transformed Sterling Dynamics into a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire and developed a reputation for remembering numbers better than names. She respected results, control, and people who never made her wait. Ethan appeared to be none of those things. Just another contractor with worn boots and a temporary badge. But that Tuesday evening, while checking a malfunctioning access control terminal on the 27th floor, Ethan noticed something that made him stop. A directory appeared on the diagnostic screen for less than 2 seconds before automatically disappearing. Most technicians would have ignored it. Ethan didn't. The file path contained 3 words that should never have appeared together: Employee Pension Reserve. His expression changed, but only slightly. He checked the system clock, wrote one number on the back of his work order, and closed the terminal. Now, 72 hours later, Victoria watched police escort that same quiet man toward the revolving doors. "Enjoy explaining this to your daughter," she said. Ethan stopped. For the first time, something cold entered his eyes. Not anger. Certainty. "Officer," he said softly, "I believe I'm entitled to make one phone call." Victoria laughed again. "Call whoever you want." E.T. : At 5:42 the next morning, 72 hours before the handcuffs closed around Ethan Walker's wrists, the alarm on his old phone vibrated across a chipped wooden nightstand. He silenced it before the second buzz. Lily was still asleep across the hallway, and protecting those last 20 minutes of her sleep mattered more to him than starting coffee on time. Ethan moved through their small apartment quietly, packed a turkey sandwich into Lily's lunchbox, added apple slices, then slipped a handwritten note beneath the napkin. "Have a brave day. Love, Dad." By 6:15, Lily wandered into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and carrying a math worksheet. "Dad, Mrs. Cooper says parents are supposed to sign this." "Parents?" Ethan asked. "Sound expensive." Lily smiled. "Very funny." He signed it. Beside the coffee maker, on the refrigerator hung a photograph of Ethan, Lily, and Lily's mother, Sarah, taken 4 summers earlier beside Lake Erie. Ethan rarely stared at it anymore. Grief had taught him that remembering someone and surviving their absence were 2 different kinds of love. "You working late again?" Lily asked. Probably. At the giant company? Sterling Dynamics. The one with the lady from TV? Ethan nodded. Victoria Sterling. Lily considered this while eating cereal. Is she nice? Ethan smiled faintly. I haven't met her. Then be nice first. He looked at his daughter. Sarah used to say exactly that. That's usually the plan. By 7:30, Ethan's aging Ford was heading downtown through gray Ohio traffic. Sterling Dynamics rose above the surrounding blocks in steel and blue glass. 40 stories of money, ambition, and carefully controlled appearances. Ethan entered through the service entrance, clipped a temporary contractor badge to his shirt, and collected the morning maintenance requests. Most employees barely noticed him. That suited him. For nearly 3 years, Ethan had accepted contract work that kept him close to Lily and far away from the life he had deliberately abandoned. His resume listed electrical systems, network hardware maintenance, and security infrastructure. It did not explain why he could read financial audit trails faster than most accountants, or why certain compliance codes still lived in his memory like old addresses. Those details belonged to another life. At 4:53 that afternoon, a security terminal on the 27th floor began repeatedly rejecting executive badges. Ethan was sent upstairs. The floor had emptied except for cleaning staff and a handful of executives behind glass conference room walls. He removed the terminal cover, connected his diagnostic laptop, and watched lines of system information scroll across the screen. Then something appeared. A hidden directory opened for barely 2 seconds before an automated process erased it from view. Ethan's fingers stopped. Employee pension reserve. He reopened the diagnostic history. Nothing. He checked the timestamp. Then the access log. A transfer had occurred at 4:47 p.m. The amount was large enough to make his breathing slow. $18.6 million. Destination unknown. Ethan wrote the transaction identifier on the back of his work order. Footsteps clicked behind him. Problem? A man asked. Ethan turned and saw Richard Hale, Sterling Dynamics Chief Operating Officer, watching him from 6 feet away. Just checking the access system, Ethan replied. Richard's eyes dropped to the work order in Ethan's hand. Then check the access system. Ethan held his gaze for 1 quiet second. That's exactly what I'm doing. Richard walked away, but Ethan noticed something before the elevator doors closed. The executive badge recorded beside the $18.6 million transfer belonged to Richard Hale. Ethan waited until Richard Hale disappeared behind the elevator doors before looking back at the diagnostic screen. The hallway returned to its polished corporate silence, but something had changed. A maintenance problem was ordinary. An $18.6 million transfer from an employee pension reserve was not. Ethan disconnected his laptop, closed the terminal panel, and carried his toolbox into an empty service room where the fluorescent lights hummed above shelves of network equipment. He unfolded the work order and studied the transaction identifier he had written down. 11 digits. 1 timestamp. 1 executive badge. That was enough to ask a question, but not enough to accuse anyone. Ethan had learned long ago that suspicion was cheap. Evidence required patience. He reopened the local diagnostic cache, searching only the temporary records created during his authorized repair. The hidden directory itself was gone, but fragments remained in the system log. 3 transfers had been routed through separate subsidiaries during the previous 6 weeks. $7.2 million. $11.4 million. $18.6 million. Different destinations, same authorization chain. Ethan leaned closer. Each transfer had been categorized as an employee benefits restructuring expense, yet none of the destination accounts matched Sterling Dynamics listed benefits administrators. He photographed nothing, copied nothing. He simply wrote down the reference numbers that had appeared. During his authorized diagnostic session, at 6:18 p.m., his phone buzzed. Lily, hey kiddo, are you coming home for dinner? I'm leaving soon. Mrs. Patterson made meatloaf. Ethan smiled. Their neighbor had been helping on late work days since Sarah died. Save me some. Lily became quiet. You sound worried. Ethan looked through the service room window at Columbus, turning gold beneath the evening sky. Just thinking. Mom said you think too much. His smile faded into something warmer. Your mom was right about a lot of things. Come home, Dad. I will. He ended the call and stared at the numbers again. That was the line Ethan never crossed anymore. Work stayed at work. Lily came first. Yet pension money was different. It belonged to people who had spent years trusting that someone behind these glass walls would protect what they had earned. At 6:31, Ethan walked to Human Resources and found Benefits Manager Claire Donnelly preparing to leave. Quick question, he said. If the employee pension reserve gets restructured, who authorizes it? Claire frowned. Why? I saw a system label during a repair. Finance handles transfers, but anything significant requires executive approval and compliance review. How significant? Anything above $5 million definitely gets reviewed. Ethan nodded. And records wouldn't disappear afterward? Claire stopped putting papers into her bag. Records don't disappear, Ethan. He thanked her and left. The next morning, he arrived early and requested the previous maintenance log for the 27th floor terminal. The record showed no malfunction at all. Someone had created the repair ticket manually 12 minutes before Ethan was assigned to it. He checked the requester. Executive Operations. At 9:06, Richard passed through the lobby without acknowledging him. Ethan watched him enter a private elevator. Then Ethan noticed another name attached to the approval metadata he had memorized the night before. Vesterlink. He stood completely still. Richard's badge had initiated the transfer, but the authorization trail led higher. Ethan reached into his pocket, touched the folded work order, and understood the danger. Differently now, this was no longer about one suspicious executive. Somewhere inside Sterling Dynamics, millions of dollars were moving beneath Victoria Sterling's authority, and someone had deliberately placed Ethan in front of the evidence. At 10:14 that morning, Ethan Walker stood outside Victoria Sterling's office with a folded work order in his pocket and one decision already made. He would give her a chance. Not because he trusted her, and not because her name appeared in the authorization trail, but because years of compliance work had taught him something most people learn too late. A signature could mean guilt, negligence, manipulation, or simply trust placed in the wrong person. The receptionist looked at his contractor badge. Ms. Sterling doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Tell her it concerns the employee pension reserve. Her expression changed. 5 minutes later, Ethan entered an office overlooking downtown Columbus. Victoria stood beside a glass conference table, reading something on a tablet. Richard Hale was nowhere in sight. You have 3 minutes, she said. Ethan placed a small USB drive on the table. Victoria looked at it, then at him. What is this? A reason to give me more than 3 minutes. Careful, Mr. Walker. I'm being careful. He explained what he had seen during the authorized diagnostic repair. The hidden directory, the 3 transfers, the disappearing records, and the approval metadata. Victoria listened without interrupting until he mentioned the total amount. $37.2 million, Ethan said. Moved from accounts labeled as employee pension reserves. Victoria's face remained composed. And you copied confidential company information? No, I preserved diagnostic records generated during my repair. The USB contains reference numbers and timestamps. Nothing outside what appeared on the terminal I was assigned to service. You expect me to believe a maintenance contractor accidentally discovered financial misconduct? I expect you to verify it. Victoria leaned back slightly. Do you know how many people walk into offices like mine believing they've uncovered a conspiracy? Probably fewer than the number who are afraid to walk in at all. Silence settled between them. Ethan pushed the USB an inch closer. Look at it before somebody gets hurt financially. Victoria's eyes hardened. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Those sound remarkably similar when delivered by someone holding internal information. Ethan remained still, then listened to the difference. He explained that pension accounts represented retirement plans, mortgages, college tuition, and decades of work belonging to people who would never sit in offices like hers. Victoria's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about my employees. I know the money has their names on it. She reached for the USB, but stopped before touching it. And what exactly do you want? Ethan almost looked disappointed. Nothing. Everyone wants something. Then maybe that's the problem. Victoria pressed a button on her desk. Security. Ethan picked up the USB before anyone entered. You're making a mistake. No, Mr. Walker. My mistake was allowing a contractor access to systems beyond his responsibilities. Your authorization code was attached to one of those transfers. For the first time, Victoria lost her practiced stillness. Only for a second, but Ethan saw it. Get out. He turned toward the door. You have until tomorrow morning. Check the records yourself. And if I don't, Ethan looked back. Then I protect the people whose money it is. Outside the office, Richard Hale stood near the elevators, holding a coffee and wearing an easy smile. Productive meeting? He asked. Ethan walked past without answering. Richard waited until the elevator doors closed, then entered Victoria's office. That evening, at 8:17, Ethan sat at his kitchen table while Lily colored beside him. His phone displayed a notification from Sterling Dynamics. Contract access terminated. A second message arrived moments later. Security incident under investigation. Ethan stared at it, then opened the secure archive he had created years ago for exactly this kind of situation. He uploaded the transaction references, timestamps, and his written account of the discovery. One final field asked for the designated release. Contact. Ethan typed a name he had not contacted in almost 3 years, attached a simple instruction, and closed the file. If anything happened to him tomorrow, one phone call would be enough to release everything. Ethan arrived at Sterling Dynamics at 8:11 the next morning because walking away would have been easier, and easier was not the same as right. His contractor badge failed at the service entrance. A red light blinked twice. The security guard behind the desk glanced at his monitor. Your access was terminated last night. I know. Then why are you here? Ethan placed his toolbox on the counter. My personal tools are still upstairs, and I need written confirmation that yesterday's maintenance records were preserved. The guard hesitated, then picked up the phone. 12 floors above them, Richard Hale was already waiting. At 7:35 that morning, Richard had entered Victoria's office carrying a printed security report. He told her Ethan had accessed restricted financial directories, copied proprietary information, and attempted to pressure the CEO with what he called evidence. Victoria read the report twice. He said he copied nothing confidential. Richard gave a patient smile. People usually say that before security finishes checking. And the pension transfers? Routine restructuring. Treasury can explain them. Why was my authorization attached? Richard barely paused. Because your standing executive approval covers internal benefit reallocations. Victoria looked toward the window. Ethan's words from the previous day returned with uncomfortable clarity. Check the records yourself. She had intended to. Richard had arrived first. At 8:26, security escorted Ethan into the main lobby rather than upstairs. Richard stepped from an elevator carrying a sealed evidence envelope. Victoria followed several yards behind him. Employees gathering for a quarterly leadership meeting slowed as they recognized the tension. Mr. Walker, Richard said, company security recovered this from a restricted workstation assigned to executive finance. He held up the envelope. Inside was a flash drive. Ethan stared at it. That isn't mine. Richard almost sounded sympathetic. The access log says otherwise. Which access log? The one tied to your contractor credentials. Ethan's eyes narrowed. My credentials were disabled last night. After the breach. Show me the timestamp. Richard's smile faded slightly. Victoria stepped closer. Ethan, if you accessed restricted systems, tell us now. I accessed the terminal you assigned me to repair. And this? She pointed toward the envelope. Never seen it. Richard handed Victoria a printed page. There's more. Files containing pension transfer data were exported under his user ID at 6:43 yesterday evening. Ethan immediately remembered where he had been at 6:43. He had been driving home after speaking with Claire Donnelly. Pull the garage exit camera, he said. My truck left at 6:36. Richard shrugged. Credentials can be used remotely. Not mine. Contractor authentication requires the physical badge. The lobby became quieter. Victoria looked at Richard. Is that true? Generally. Generally isn't an answer. Before Richard could respond, Two uniformed Columbus police officers entered through the revolving doors. Ethan looked at them, then at Richard. The timing told him everything. This had never been an investigation. It was a performance. One officer approached calmly. "Ethan Walker?" "Yes. We need to speak with you regarding a complaint involving unauthorized access and removal of corporate information." Ethan nodded. "I'll cooperate." Victoria studied him as though waiting for panic, excuses, anything that would make Richard's story easier to believe. Ethan gave her none. Richard leaned closer to her and spoke quietly. This is what people like him do when they think they've found leverage. Ethan heard him. He said nothing. Then the officer asked Ethan to place his hands behind his back while they completed the detention procedure. A few employees began whispering. Victoria's uncertainty disappeared beneath wounded pride. She looked at the contractor who had challenged her authority in her own office, and she laughed. Ethan slowly turned toward her. He finally understood why the evidence had been placed so carefully, why the police had arrived during a leadership gathering, and why Richard needed Victoria watching. Richard was not merely framing Ethan. He was using Victoria herself to legitimize the lie. And somewhere outside this building, waiting behind a secure archive, was the one person Richard Hale did not know existed. The laughter lasted less than 3 seconds, but Lily Walker heard every one of them. "Dad!" Her small voice crossed the marble lobby with enough fear to erase every whisper around her. Ethan turned. Lily stood near the revolving doors beside Mrs. Patterson, still wearing her purple school backpack. The older woman had apparently brought her downtown after Ethan failed to answer 2 calls. Lily stared at the handcuffs, then at Victoria Sterling, unable to understand why adults in expensive suits had been laughing. "Sweetheart, stay with Mrs. Patterson. Why are they taking you? They have questions. Did you do something wrong?" Ethan held her gaze. "No." Richard Hale stepped toward Victoria and lowered his voice. "We should move this away from employees." Ethan heard him, but his attention remained on Lily. She looked close to tears. "Then tell them," she whispered. "Tell everybody." Ethan's expression softened. "Remember what I taught you. Truth doesn't become smaller because people laugh at it." The lobby went still. Victoria's smile disappeared. For one uncomfortable moment, she saw something the security reports had not shown her. Not a thief, not an extortionist, a father trying to keep his daughter from becoming afraid of the world. "Mr. Walker," one officer said gently, "we need to go." "I understand." Ethan looked toward Mrs. Patterson. "Take Lily home." Lily shook her head. "I want to stay with you." "I know." He managed a small smile. "But I need you to trust me." Richard glanced toward the officers. "Surely we're finished here." Ethan turned toward him. "Not quite." Richard's face remained composed, but his right hand tightened around the folder he was carrying. Ethan noticed. Victoria did too. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means your chief operating officer made one mistake." Richard gave a short laugh. "Now he's trying to intimidate us." "What mistake?" Victoria repeated. Ethan looked directly at her. He assumed the only evidence was inside this building. Silence returned. Richard stepped forward. "Anything removed from company systems is stolen property. I didn't remove company files." "Then you have nothing. That's what you're hoping." One officer guided Ethan toward the doors, but Ethan stopped before crossing the lobby. "Officer, I'd like to exercise my right to contact someone as soon as your procedure allows." "You'll have that opportunity." Victoria folded her arms, rebuilding the cold confidence that had carried her through boardrooms for 15 years. "Call whoever you want." Ethan looked at her. That was always the plan. 35 minutes later, he sat in a quiet processing room at the downtown police facility. The officer placed a phone within reach and explained the limits of the call. Ethan thanked him. "No anger. No pleading." He dialed a number from memory. It rang once, twice. Then a woman answered. "Hello." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He had not heard that voice in almost 3 years. "Rebecca, it's Ethan Walker." The other end went silent. "Ethan, I need you to open the archive." Her breathing changed. "Which archive?" "Sterling." A pause. "Are you sure?" Ethan looked through the glass partition toward the officer reviewing Richard's complaint. "Yes." "What happened?" They crossed the line. Rebecca's voice became precise, professional. Give me the release phrase. Ethan spoke 4 quiet words. Release the original files. Rebecca did not ask another question. Understood. Ethan returned the phone. Across town, at exactly 9:17 a.m., encrypted copies of his diagnostic records, timestamps, written disclosure, and preservation notice began moving toward 3 predetermined recipients. One went to outside counsel. One went to the Sterling Dynamics Board Audit Committee. The third went somewhere Victoria Sterling had never imagined. At 9:18, the first phone inside her executive conference room began to ring. At 9:18 a.m., Victoria Sterling's general counsel looked down at his phone and stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. 2 seconds later, the chief financial officer's phone vibrated against the conference table. Then another. Then another. Around the polished walnut surface, 12 senior executives watched their screens light up almost simultaneously. Richard Hale remained standing beside the windows. What is it? Victoria asked. General Counsel Daniel Mercer did not answer immediately. His face had changed. We've received a preservation notice. From whom? Outside counsel. Victoria Froneth. For what? Daniel turned his phone toward her. Employee retirement funds, internal authorization records, security access logs, executive communications, and every document connected to 3 subsidiaries. Richard stepped forward. This is Walker. He's bluffing. No, Daniel said quietly. This isn't a bluff. The CFO, Margaret Ellis, was already opening the encrypted package on her laptop. There are transaction identifiers. Richard shook his head. Stolen information. Not exactly. Margaret enlarged the first page. These appear to be diagnostic records generated during an authorized maintenance session. There's also a contemporaneous written disclosure showing Ethan reported the irregularities before the complaint against him was filed. Victoria felt the room narrow around her. Reported to whom? Daniel looked at her. You. Nobody spoke. The air conditioning whispered overhead. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, office phones continued ringing. Richard finally broke the silence. He manufactured a story after accessing restricted systems. Margaret's eyes moved rapidly across the screen. Then we have a problem. What problem? The timestamps. She turned the laptop. Ethan's archive was sealed before the alleged export occurred at 6:43 p.m., and building access records show his contractor badge exited the parking garage 7 minutes earlier. Victoria looked at Richard. You told me credentials could be used remotely. They can. With physical badge authentication? Richard hesitated. Under certain circumstances. Daniel leaned forward. Name one. Richard's jaw tightened. I'm not the security architect. Victoria Stuth. Neither is Ethan, apparently. Yet he knew. Her phone rang. The caller identification displayed. Board chair. She answered. Victoria. Don't say anything substantive on this line, Chairman Thomas Caldwell said. His voice was controlled and unusually formal. The audit committee received Walker's disclosure. Victoria turned toward the windows. Thomas, this is an internal misunderstanding. It stopped being internal 5 minutes ago. What does that mean? A third preservation package was delivered to federal regulators. Victoria's fingers tightened around the phone. Richard moved toward the door. Stay, she said. He stopped. Caldwell continued. No records are to be deleted, altered, moved, or destroyed. The board is convening emergency council. Your authority over the relevant systems is temporarily suspended. Victoria stared at the skyline she had spent 15 years learning to look down upon. You're suspending me because of a maintenance contractor? You still don't know who Ethan Walker is, do you? The question landed differently than everything else. Victoria turned slowly. What are you talking about? Caldwell exhaled. Have legal run his full professional history. The call ended. Victoria immediately looked at Daniel. Do it. Minutes later, Daniel placed a background report on the conference screen. The first page contained the familiar details. Widower, father, contractor, systems maintenance. Then Daniel opened an archived professional record that had not appeared in Sterling's vendor file. His expression hardened. This can't be right. Read it, Victoria said. Daniel swallowed. Ethan Walker spent 11 years in forensic compliance and financial systems investigations. He specialized in tracing concealed corporate transfers and preserving evidence for regulatory review. Richard's face lost its color. Victoria looked toward him. You knew. No, then why frame him? Richard said nothing. Margaret suddenly raised a hand. There's more. She had opened the original pension ledger. 3 transfers appeared, followed by 6 older ones. The total was no longer $37.2 million. It was $214 million. And beside the oldest authorization chain was something even worse. A digital approval carrying Victoria Sterling's executive signature, recorded 8 months earlier after an internal compliance warning had already been issued. Victoria stared at the screen. Richard had moved the money, but her signature had protected the system that allowed him to do it. The empire had not begun collapsing when Ethan made his call. It had begun months earlier when Victoria signed something she had been too powerful to bother reading. Victoria read the $214 million total twice, as if the number might become smaller if she refused to believe it the first time. It did not. Explain this, she said. Richard Hale remained near the conference room door, his confidence reduced to silence. Margaret Ellis opened another ledger. The transfers began 8 months ago. Each one moved through subsidiaries classified as benefits management entities, then into consulting accounts that don't appear to have legitimate operating activity. And my signature? Victoria asked. Daniel Mercer answered carefully. Your executive approval authorized the restructuring framework. After that, Richard's office could initiate transfers beneath it without requesting your signature each time. Victoria turned toward Richard. You told me the restructuring would reduce administrative costs. It was supposed to. $214 million. Victoria, listen to me. No, you've had 8 months to talk. Now you answer. Richard glanced around the table. Walker manipulated the records. Margaret shook her head. He couldn't have. Some of these records came directly from our independent retirement custodian after the preservation notice. They match Ethan's reference numbers. Richard's eyes moved toward the elevator beyond the glass wall. Daniel noticed. Security has been instructed to preserve your badge and company devices. You can't detain me here. No one said we could, Daniel replied. But leaving won't erase the records. Victoria walked toward the conference screen. A compliance memorandum dated 8 months earlier appeared beside her electronic signature. She remembered the day now. 12 meetings, 2 investor calls, a product crisis in Dallas. Richard had entered her office with a stack of approvals and told. Her legal had reviewed everything. She had signed in less than 90 seconds. At the bottom of the pension document, beneath language she had never read, was a warning from an internal analyst requesting independent review before any transfers were authorized. Who wrote this warning? Victoria asked. Margaret searched the archived personnel directory. Nathan Cole, senior compliance analyst. Where is he? He resigned 7 months ago. Victoria closed her eyes. She understood. Richard had not forged her signature. He had done something more useful. He had learned that Victoria's arrogance made forgery unnecessary. Give her enough success, enough urgency, enough confidence in her own judgment, and she would sign the door open herself. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Thomas Caldwell. The board has voted, he said. Effective immediately, you are suspended as CEO pending independent review. Victoria's voice became almost inaudible. Thomas, your access to corporate accounts and executive systems is frozen. I built this company. Then you should have protected it. The call ended. Across the room, Richard quietly reached for his phone. Daniel stopped him with 3 words. Leave it there. Minutes later, 2 federal investigators arrived with company counsel. There were no raised voices, no spectacle. Richard was informed that investigators required his cooperation regarding the financial records and preservation order. The same employees who had watched Ethan escorted away now watched Richard leave the executive floor under formal supervision. Victoria remained behind. No one laughed. By 11:06 a.m., Sterling Dynamics board had announced an independent investigation. Trading in company shares have been temporarily halted, and outside auditors have begun tracing every transfer. Ethan's single call had not magically destroyed an innocent company. It had simply removed the darkness protecting what was already broken. At the police facility, an officer entered Ethan's processing room carrying a folder. "Mr. Walker, the complaint against you is being reassessed. New evidence shows serious inconsistencies in the access records." Ethan nodded once. "Thank you. There's someone from Sterling's outside counsel asking to speak with you." "Not yet. There's also a woman named Rebecca Shaw waiting downstairs." Ethan finally looked up. "She came herself?" "Said you'd understand." Ethan did. Rebecca had once been his closest colleague in forensic compliance, and she had kept the archive exactly as promised. Then the officer unlocked the handcuffs and placed them on the table. Across town, Victoria stood alone in the same marble lobby where she had laughed less than 2 hours earlier. The elevator opened. Ethan Walker stepped out beside Rebecca Shaw, free, quiet, and carrying the original file that could decide what remained of Victoria Sterling's empire. The elevator doors opened without ceremony, and Ethan Walker stepped into the lobby where less than 2 hours earlier people had watched him leave in handcuffs. Rebecca Shaw walked beside him carrying a slim black folder. No police officers surrounded Ethan now. No one whispered. No one laughed. Employees stood near the reception desk and along the glass corridor, watching the quiet single father cross the same marble floor with the same worn boots and the same steady expression. Victoria Sterling waited beneath the steel letters bearing her family name. For the first time that morning, they seemed less like a monument and more like a question. "Ethan," she said. He stopped several feet away. "Ms. Sterling." Victoria looked toward Rebecca. "You're the release contact." Rebecca nodded. "I preserved what Ethan documented and distributed it according to his instructions." Victoria turned back to him. "You knew this could happen. I knew evidence disappears when powerful people become afraid of it." Her eyes lowered. "I laughed at you." Ethan said nothing. That silence was harder to face than anger. "I saw the handcuffs," Victoria continued, "and decided they proved I was right. They proved someone called the police." Victoria swallowed. Around them, the lobby remained completely still. "Richard used me." "Yes. But I signed the authorization." "Yes. And I ignored your warning." Ethan held her gaze. "Yes." There was no cruelty in his voice, only truth. Victoria looked toward the folder Rebecca carried. "Is there anything in there that clears me?" Rebecca glanced at Ethan before answering. "It shows Richard Hale directed the transfers and manipulated the access records used against Ethan. It also shows you received sufficient warning to stop the process and fail to act." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. "So I destroyed my own company." Ethan shook his head. An empire isn't destroyed because someone tells the truth about it. It falls when protecting the empire becomes more important than protecting the people inside it. The revolving doors turned behind them. Lily rushed into the lobby with Mrs. Patterson following several steps back. Ethan immediately knelt as his daughter reached him. "Dad." "Hey, kiddo." Lily looked at his wrists, then his face. "They let you go?" They learned more of the truth. She wrapped her arms around him. Ethan held her quietly. Victoria watched from 10 feet away, and something in her expression finally broke free from pride. "Lily," she said softly. The girl looked at her. Victoria hesitative. Apologies had never appeared on quarterly reports. They could not be delegated or negotiated. "I treated your father unfairly," she said. "I'm sorry." Lily looked at Ethan as if asking what to do. He gave no instruction. After a moment, she answered, "My dad says people should get a chance to do better." Victoria's eyes filled, but she managed a small nod. "Your dad is wiser than I was." In the months that followed, investigators recovered most of the diverted pension funds. Richard Hale faced federal financial charges through the justice system, while the board permanently removed Victoria as CEO. Sterling Dynamics survived, but the Sterling Empire as she had known it did not. Assets were sold, executives were replaced, and an independent employee protection fund was established from money Victoria voluntarily surrendered from her personal holdings. Ethan refused every offer to become the company's public hero. He returned home to Lily. He fixed breakfast. He drove his old Ford. Eventually, he accepted a position advising a nonprofit that protected employee retirement funds. Work he could do without sacrificing the evenings that belonged to his daughter. One autumn afternoon, a handwritten letter arrived. It was from Victoria. There were no excuses inside. Only 3 words Ethan had once thought she might never understand. I was wrong. Ethan folded the letter and placed it in a kitchen drawer. Lily looked up from her homework. Are you going to answer? Ethan smiled. Maybe. What will you say? He looked through the window at the quiet Ohio evening. That second chances only matter when we use them. Lily smiled and returned to her homework. Ethan poured 2 glasses of lemonade and sat beside her. He had never needed an empire. He had never needed revenge. In the end, the loudest thing Ethan Walker ever carried in his sterling dynamics was the truth, and when it finally spoke, the whole room had gone silent.